Hello, Alfie. Happy Sunday.
Happy Sunday, Freddie.
Here we are.
Sit by a fire in the tea house.
Lovely roaring fire in the tea house
Beautiful.
this afternoon.
Red, orange, and flames.
It's beautiful. So, yes, here we are, sat in front of a fire to follow on from last week's chat about the themes of eerie and weird in relation to storytelling and horror storytelling with the great god Pan.
Yes.
Splendid.
So, Freddie, at last, you've actually read The Great God Pan.
I have finally read The Great God Pan.
As you know, I came across this book, not the book, the stories, many years ago. And it's haunted me, as you know, in a big way, in a very positive way, actually. So where do we begin? Because you read it as well.
Yeah.
And you are going to do a reading with, is it 3 other people?
So it's myself, Alan English and Neil McNeil. So the usual trio for fireside readings. We're going to read that on Sunday the 25th. So nice and close to Halloween. We'll get the fire on and everyone sit around and we'll do the story. Yes, yeah.
Yeah. Now, it fits very well for reading. Anyway, what is your take up? Just briefly, because I don't want to spend the whole session with me talking, because I'll just go off on one.
Yeah, but I enjoy that. But anyway,
this, I mean, let's see if we can.
What's my takeaway from this? So, it's a really good story. Like, I really enjoyed it. It's not too long. Unfortunately, with working here, I could only read it in bits. I think I'm looking forward to reading it all the way through with the lads, because I think that's going to be wonderful. It starts like it moves nicely from place to place, and like the underlying, you sort of think I know what's going on, but I'm not sure. You sort of thread it together, and he brings you along when you're sort of in that way where you sort of think you know what's going on, and you're just ahead of the characters, which is where you should be, I think, in a story. It makes you feel clever. And in terms of it, like that ancient, mystical, pagan, godly element just of horror in the background. What's fascinating, I mean, so it's written in what, the 50s-ish, 60s it's written?
What, this?
Yeah.
No.
Or earlier. When did he write it?
1897.
Oh, right, so he wrote it when he was quite young?
Yeah.
Right, sorry, yes, I'm reading the backs of 2 different books.
Yeah, because
sorry, yes, we were talking about this last week. Sorry, it's been a long week. So, when it's written, like, the thing with Pan, the horned god, like in the ancient, like he is a chief god in that kind of Celtic end of things, like, and with the Christian takeover, that to sort of to put away the old gods, like that horned figure becomes the Lucifer figure, becomes the devil figure, and like, so what is an ancient, good, high god of some description, probably quite debauched, I don't know, these it's all lost to the mist of time. The point is that imagery that we see of a horned god is seen as evil because of the early Christians stamping out the older beliefs. And so obviously he's writing turn of the century, we were talking about time of change, and I'm sure you've got loads on that, but in terms of just the use of Pan in that way, it's totally understandable, but at the same time, I think now those gods and those ideas and that linking Pan with horror, there's also links into people like Apollo and the god and with his pipes and gods of art and gods of music and gods of creativity. So like there's a place within our mythology in a kind of like as we get less organised religion. I know there's a place for Pan, but I think it's probably got bad rap, and this type of story, totally understandable, and like to see those, like it's beautiful horror to like take this character and show all those themes, and like it is wonderful, but it's definitely of its time in that sense, because that devil and Pan imagery was obviously still very strong because there's still a relatively kind of God-fearing people. I hadn't really thought about my answer to that question, so it turns out that's it.
But remember, it's always to keep in mind that it takes place in London in 1897.
Slightly before, because I think he mentions 1880. Does he mention 1888 at the end?
Anyway, it
the
was
letter?
in that period.
Yeah.
In London, when at the height of the English of the British Empire, and it predominantly takes place in Soho,
Which is,
although it opens in Wales.
yeah. That's where those gods still were probably the strongest, and are still probably the strongest. If you take a kind of idea of things staying in an ether, they're still probably strongest there.
But not giving too much away of the story, it does begin with a scientific experiment.
Doesn't it just?
says Freddie with a look on his face. I think we're both trying not to give too much of the plot away.
I don't think it's too bad to give too much away, because like we're not. You still, even if you know roughly what's going on, so we'll try not to spoil it. But I don't think you spoil it by discussing it a little bit. I think it'd be difficult to do it without talking about the story.
I mean, Machen was born in Wales, grew up for a large part of his teenage years in Wales, and he was surrounded by that atmosphere. He was on the borderlands of Wales and England, but in his mind he was also on the borderlands of prehistory, paganism, Roman civilization and Christianity. So there's a sort of tension,
that feeling,
there's a tension of the borderland, which I think goes through a lot of his work anyway. But the clever aspect of this particular story is the way he just simply links it into Soho and makes it quite real. We were aware that it's different, that the plotting, the story is about something to all intents and purposes should not be happening in the modern age, even though it's the late 19th century. It should not be happening. And although we have an idea of what might be going on, the people involved in the plotting don't have the idea yet, although they realise it's something quite powerful. It's developing. And it's happening to their friends as well, to people they know, to people they was brought up with, to people who had professions.
And their social circle, and they are quite refined, and they're professionals and doctors and civilised. folk.
You know, they was a sort of the backbone of the empire. They were the they were the backbone. They were the people who ensured that the empire was being bureaucratically governed. But they had gentlemen's clubs. They went to the right clubs. They loved the fine wine. They loved doing what we're doing, sitting by a fire,
absolutely,
chatting about old times and good times. They did not expect any of their circles to end up deranged, in poverty, in degradation. The fear of that Victorian Edwardian horror story is to fall below a certain level. But these guys, they fall beyond that certain level and beyond any other level. It's because of this experiment at the start that goes wrong, which has called back something from the past, from a prehistory, pre-Christian past.
Yeah, and I think he actually, in that sense, like he keeps the mysticism at sort of the right level. Like we're not sure. It's something. Ill-defined. Something is weird that's happening, and it's like as in outcomes. Horrible things have happened to people. But the mysticism is sort of just running under now. I mean, I know we were chatting earlier, and I was sort of saying like, I really want to know more about the mysticism, but that kind of comes from my opening point about the old gods, and I want more about the old gods generally. But I think actually in terms of the story, like that, them not knowing really, and the mysticism being at a lowish level in their knowledge, and therefore in the storytelling, actually quite works from the way you've just laid it out. And
it is what I love about it. One is the language, that gentleman's club language. It's
the way they're strolling up streets that like they stroll up Rupert Street. And
they're strolling down
Shaftesbury Avenue. Like, I know these
and
places.
Wardour Street and around there, Now, what's interesting about some of those streets, and unfortunately, folks, me and Freddie was hoping to go for a walk this Tuesday to explore some of the topography that influenced Machen. But it looks like London is being condemned to a downpour.
Well, we'll see how it goes.
But what's interesting, where I was born in King's Cross, all those years ago, in these what would now be incredibly expensive houses, they weren't slums, but they weren't, they were going to be pulled down. But above every doorway was an image.
Right.
And you can still see those images in London. And some of them may have been of the god Pan or other gods, or they was representative of figures, of characters who were not part of our existence.
Right.
They were like ornamental characterizations of some ancient religion or ancient fun. Freddie is now putting more logs on the fire. And so I love fires. Primitive, the return. So always keep in mind with Machen, one, where he came from, that borderland of Wales mythology, and now he's in the big metropolis in Clerkenwell, London. In Clerkenwell, North London. Now that's very interesting for the landscape. And I was born near there, in King's Cross, which is in walking distance, and then moved into just off what's called the Angel in London. But Clerkenwell it's an amazing place because it's very hilly, and it doesn't take the imagination too long to conjure up in your mind what's beneath our feet, what's beneath the tarmac, what's beneath the concrete, or what may have been beneath our feet.
And what the landscape would have been like.
And it's not too far from the River Thames. So there certainly would have been little lakes or little streams heading off that way. So for somebody of Machen's sensibility, it was heavy. His mind could flow wherever, where he wanted to go. And it was fortunate that he was exploring all these ideas at a time when all these ideas were not just being accepted, but were also being explored. And that is the other side of Edwardian respectability, Edwardian London, and of Victorian. So, in many ways, I don't think he set about doing this, but on reflection we could look at it. In many ways, he was turning normality, what we consider to be normal, on its head. Maybe it's not. Like now, we're saying, wouldn't it be good to go back to normality?
Oh gosh, aren't we just? Yeah.
But
well, we may have unleashed some forces. Who knows?
that we don't know about. Are we going to go back to what is called normality, or not? I don't know.
Well, I think normality evolves but from their perspective, the characters and this stuff interceding on their normality. I mean, it sits. Like, because you're talking Soho, so they talk about, the Carlton Club and these clubs. And, leaves the Carlton Club and walks home, and then stuff happens, right? But like that whole area, St James's, is right next to Soho, and then they're walking in Soho, and he talks about certain streets in Soho then as now being the sort of places where you only find the very low, and there is that kind of
but they live there and they walk there and they drink there,
but they live in their respectable existence and go to certain places which are right next door to the filthier places. And I think it alludes. I think part of it is alluding to that, and
St Paul Street, isn't there? Where one of the houses.
Yeah. But where he meets
disrespectable.
But even where he meets her towards the end, when he works out what he's looking for, and he sees her in this place where he wasn't really expecting a reasonably respectable woman to be, because this is the sort of place where you'd be really low if you're going there, and it's like it's almost like the dark underbelly of civilization, that dark human lascivious nature that rubs always, no matter how respectable you are, is always rubbing up against there. I mean, how many politicians and sex scandals do you need for that to be just true? I don't know where I'm going with that.
But with Pan, Pan was a Greek god, not a Roman god. Although the Romans, like all empires, actually adapted what he was for, but he was a fairly low down god in terms of the hierarchy of gods. But one of the things that he was noted for, apart from being half man, half goat, who loved wandering in the woods and loved seclusion, he also loved watching people. He was a sort of, I don't know what you would call it. There was this sense that he was always watching, observing, and would get up to mischief. Not damaging mischief, but mischief.
There's always a god of mischief somewhere, isn't there?
But somewhere along the line, that Pan cult which wasn't very big, became entwined with Dionysus, and the cult of Dionysus,
Right.
which was wild. I mean, it was Greek. And all sorts of cultish activities took place.
Wine, women, and song type of thing?
Well,
But
more than that as
extreme,
well. I mean,
but-
it was all about excess. You took
Yeah.
everything to an
And that
excess.
sort of like Bacchus as well.
Yeah, I mean, the Romans would call it Bacchus, but with Dionysus, there's a difference in the sense that he was also respected and feared, and women were involved in it quite a lot as well.
Right.
They felt secure in the fact that they could actually let loose after all the confines. So the actual idea, and this is interesting, that Pan is not a male god in the story. Although there's that duality between female, male, female, male,
Yeah, I was
monster.
going to say, make your case that he's not a male god. Go on. I'm not sure
No,
about
in
that.
there.
In the story, I'm not sure.
Well,
I've
who
only
is?
read it once, of course.
Yeah, but who is it? Who is the god Pan in the story?
Well, I still think that's... on one reading, find that open to question. I'm not certain.
Remember what I've just said about Pan? From female to male,
Yeah.
from male to female, from female to male, to a monster.
Yeah.
So there's all those different ambiguities going on.
Yes, there are. How much to say? So, like, the character is female. Or, well, let's talk in the modern way of talking about these issues. Alfie presents as female, as they'd say in the universities. Yeah. So if that, because suppose we can take the one line, which is. It's like the beginning, the opening, the experiment is about being able to see the great god Pan, isn't it? That's the opening. So I guess we're talking all these things happen to these unfortunate chaps because they've seen the great god Pan. So yes, she... The human form is female, but like it does switch.
Would we be
In looking
giving-
at
yeah,
it switches between that and the man and the
Because-
beast.
the person who sees the great god Pan goes mad,
Yeah,
but gives birth 9 months later.
and yes, I think we can say that.
I don't want to. I think we're both treading softly.
Yeah, it's
I don't want
difficult
to give
to
too
not.
much
You don't want
away.
to give too much away,
Yeah.
but I think it's
But
important.
before all that, there is that opening description of the countryside.
The opening description.
Of the countryside.
Yes. Oh, that's lovely. You can see it when he just describes all that. The hills and the forests and the creeks and the crags and the little inlets and the... You probably know it better than I do.
But that's in Wales.
Yeah.
Right? But when we go around Clerkenwell, keep that opening in your mind, because that could have been what Clerkenwell once looked like
Right.
in another period, way beyond prehistory. It would have looked like that. So, I mean, that opening is quite beautiful.
It really is.
But it setting up where those old religions were hovering in the atmosphere.
You've still got, yes.
Yeah.
And emotional,
And it's like that
physical,
other,
some sort
you know,
of
the one you're going to start reading, The Hill of Dreams. It's about that as well.
Let's
But what
not
he focuses
stray
on-
too far. Just before we fit on the is it a man? Is it a woman? Is it a beast thing? We're going to the landscape in a minute. I don't think we finished the man, woman, beast. I thought you had a thing on.
No,
that.
that was
But
just.
it's interesting
That's how
that
it
it's
goes
not.
in the story.
Because he was a male god, but in the story,
It's male, female, male, female, male, female, beast. So there's that duality. But she, the main character, or the character, once the vision has been seen by the other, you know, the bottomized young woman. So obviously, Pan is the father of the woman.
yes, this is why, because this is the sort of point. Like, is Pan the father?
Well, there's no. I don't think there's any
Is
doubt.
he his own father? Does he inhabit her, the child? It's difficult. Again, it doesn't. It's left to us, I think. It's not explicit, certainly in the story, whether. I'd assume that Pan's the father, unless it's a virgin birth, but that wouldn't.
No, she's seen the great god Pan. Right,
Seen
she's
him.
seen it, yeah.
Seen him
But it's
properly.
at the end, don't forget the ending,
Yeah. Well,
where it's like a revelation. He,
Yeah.
You know, he was the father.
but then
Because
did he use that child to bring himself into the physical world?
And she died, and you know, once she had given birth, she dies. But the person who carried out the experiment has been holding on to that secret.
For this whole time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that is this sort of, will he come back? Will the god, or will there be a much more vicious kind of god? I mean, because don't forget, those pagan gods weren't happy, smiling folks. I mean, they were invented for a reason. To
Yeah,
you know,
they're the gods of a people
Yeah,
living in a harsh and difficult environment.
yeah. To sort of, you know, they lived in the countryside. They knew the countryside that Machen was describing at the start of the story, which is obviously a Welsh countryside from his own childhood. I think that was his own childhood memory. But you can, as I say, you can transfer that countryside over to Clerkenwell, where he ended up writing most of his work.
And so,
And what's interesting as well, he was touching, particularly in the three suicides, he was touching a nerve in that society. The fire is leaping out of the fireplace in that society.
yeah.
And suicide was condemned.
It was probably still illegal back then, wasn't it?
It was. Obviously, he couldn't go to prison, you know, because he was dead. I don't know if you attempted suicide if you could go to prison, but for middle-class men to commit suicide, I mean, that would have been, my God, for one middle-class man to commit suicide, but three
In the
to
space of a few
presume,
weeks, yeah.
you know, we presumed that they actually committed suicide. Well, they did, but why? That is the other thing. What drove those three men, highly successful in terms of business, in terms of career, in terms of who they knew, which is a big part of, that sort of chumocracy, as Cameron called it. But they committed suicide, whereas a day or 2 days before, they appeared to be, in brackets, normal, until they go to a certain house in Paul Street, when things start to go wrong. Now, I think he was touching upon a raw nerve there. That maybe we don't feel it, but I think at the time it must have been, my God, these people, they must have gone down so low. But we know, having read the story, that other forces were at work.
But in the story, it's quite plain that this is scandalous. It's front page headline news. Gentleman commits suicide, and so that wouldn't be front page headline news now. But back then, it's front page headline news, and the way he describes that the police have got no idea why, and they can't work out why at all. That these chaps seem no debts, no difficulties, no. So yeah, it comes through that must have been quite a scandal.
Which also goes on another interesting thing I think we can overlook with Machen. He was also touching upon the penny dreadfuls, the rise of the newspapers that were all about gossip, were all about, it's like Dr. Jekyll, not Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, it was like Jack the Ripper.
Right, yeah, well, yes, they are made analogous in the storytelling. While in the East they couldn't work out why all these murders were happening or who'd done them, but they could at least put that down to just some sort of excessive need for violence. Whereas even in this case, they couldn't even put it down
because
to
it becomes front page news. Those suicides or whatever, the young boys newspaper serves in Shaftesbury Avenue. Another body found. Another gentleman's suicide discovered. So it's he's playing with that medium of not gossip, but the flirtation with a good murder story.
Oh yeah, and a bit of Schadenfreude in there as well.
Yeah. So he's bringing those in, which I think we can just forget about that, because he was using all that was going on around him in society. And I love that bit of the newspaper boys in Shaftesbury Avenue.
It gets closer
shouting about another body found in Paul Street. You can imagine, like in the East End of London, people knew where that was, who lived there, and people who lived in near and around Shaftesbury Avenue, Wardour Street, Soho, to read that, my God, they're on to us.
On our doorstep.
Yeah.
It's that, it's that dark force underlying civilization. Do you think, at that time, because we're talking about the high point, really, of empire, do you think that was just the great fear? That some horrible, terrible force unknowing
when you look what was going on, those
make everything kind of crash down.
Which we touched upon last week. You have this one, the great god Pan. You have Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, which is incredibly ambiguous about evil. Dr. Jekyll wanted to explore evil. When you read it deeply, he wanted to explore evil and cruelty.
Fun.
And with Mr. Hyde, that's there. And the classic, a picture of Dorian Gray, a debauched aristocratic beauty who's taken up by aristocratic society. This sort of, almost like a Greek god character who's painted by one of the top artists of the day. But the picture of beauty is kept up in an attic, and is slowly rotting, while the image of beauty is going around carrying out his evil deeds. So you have these three novels or stories, and there's something interesting connection, because they came out quite close together, and you could bring in maybe sometime in the future Dracula, which I think I said last week. I've always enjoyed it, but I've never really taken it seriously. But what I have found out, there is a much better vampire than Dracula.
Right.
And that is Varney the vampire, who became a big favourite it's a bit earlier than all these stories that we're just touching upon. Varney the vampire is a Lord Varney. I only found this out the other day, actually. So I'm a bit sort of dubious about it, but it became very popular in the Penny Dreadfuls.
Right.
He was serialised, and he couldn't die at all. He just could, So he was already dead, and he was a vampire in our concept. And the only way that he could kill himself in the end is to jump into Mount Vesuvius, Pompeii.
Right.
Pompeii, the volcano.
Yeah.
He kills himself by jumping in. But to me, he's a much more interesting creation, because he comes out of the Penny Dreadfuls. And I just think Bram Stoker just took that and used it, and there was a lot else going on culturally and in terms of warfare. But so all these strange popular cultures, these strange, powerful ideas, emotions, were already being explored, and people made a lot of money out of them.
I mean, like the
Which
exploration.
I think is good, because they're good stories. But
artists should get paid.
it goes back to, we could argue, not yet, but I still think we're stuck in the book. We don't want to give too much away. We could go back to this thing that is in the book. What was here? Prehistory, i.e. pre-Roman.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's just.
Oral tradition.
Oh yeah.
Where did I get a lot of my stories from? Oral tradition.
Yeah, I mean.
King's Cross Station,
Ah, yes, yeah.
right? We now people see it as Harry Potter, something, yeah.
Yeah.
But when I was being brought up, it was a story that at King's Cross is where Boudica met her death. No evidence at all, except the Caledonian Road, which is a Roman road that goes north. And it was a common story. We had no, we didn't whether we believed it or not, but it was one of many stories. The angel, one of the stories, and this was told to me by a woman who owned a public house or chat, near the angel, which when we do the walk, I'll show you where it was. But the story she told me is that Joseph of Arimathea was there with his staff, and he put the staff in the ground. That's why it became the angel.
Oh.
Now, it's an oral tradition.
Yeah. This is stuff that's handed down, and it's a form of truth in and of itself.
Yeah, but it's a story, oral tradition. We don't need evidence because there is no evidence. It doesn't matter anyway. They're lovely stories. They held people's attention. So, as you know, I've always said that really, in this country, we don't know our past. We're beginning to uncover it via archaeology. But when I say our past, I mean before the Romans arrived.
Yeah.
We don't really know. We still can't get our
Well, there's so
heads
many.
around Stonehenge. We can't understand.
We're so invaded, weren't we? You see, so like you had that whole period where you've got that history, and then the Romans come along and take out a good swidge of it, and then the Saxons with the Christianity come and take out another swidge of it, and then the Normans take out even more, and it gets lost because, you know, invasion, repeated invasion. So,
But one of the things that wasn't lost, actually, was the Druids.
well, no, I mean, the thing is, yes, this is the thing, oral tradition and some things seep through. So, like, we know names of old gods, we know some, we know the idea of the Druid and the ancient priest, and we know as many gods. And, you know, you can allude to things because you've got a bit more evidence of, like, the sort of Northern German and Viking, Scandinavian lore, because some of their stories were written down in some form in the Middle Ages. So and the Greek and Roman polytheisms that were written down much more widely. So and you can see parallels all across those. So you can sort of say, right, well, it's likely to take some sort of similar polytheistic form to these other polytheisms, but that's about as far as we can get.
And in a lot of Machen stories, there was no Christianity.
That's good.
So he's going right back in his imagination to another time. He's going back prehistory, as we call it, by prehistory, pre-Roman, pre-written down. But the ruins of Rome, its fortifications, still dominate his imagination on the borderlands of Wales and England. So, and again, they would have been fortifications before Christianity. They would have been the Roman gods and pagans.
And all these gods are gods of landscape. Like the monotheism is some sort of high omnipotent godhead, but all the pre-Christian deities are representations of nature in some form or t'other, and you're praying or sacrificing for good harvests, or for good weather, or for the land itself, or for the trees or the streams. And so these things, well, it's almost like each god has a tighter representation of something that the people are encountering and finding that it gives them sort of problems in their daily existence on the land.
Now, can I just come in here?
Yeah.
Right. In the 60s through to the 70s was one of the great folk singing groups. I mean, they were amazing. And me and Roz used to have all their records. I mean, they were absolutely beautiful. Their harmonies were. They were from up north, and they had this strong northern sensibility, really powerful. And everyone knows where their voices came from. Like it was a gift of the gods. But they made an LP called Frost and Fire. You should listen to it because I think I've mentioned.
What was the group?
The Waterstones.
The Waterstones,
Yeah.
Frost and Fire.
Yeah. Now
I'm liking the sound of that already.
that is about oral tradition. Sung in this beautiful voice. These beautiful, I mean, absolutely the harmonies are just. I could go on all day talking about these. Now, they sort of folk group. They weren't taken up, even in the mob. People liked their sound because it was pure. Some years ago, is it Brian Eno?
Right, yeah.
He organised a festival at the festival hall, and the last remaining singer, the woman, the vocalist, was there, and he was promoting their work to a packed out audience who had never heard their work before. I mean, there are instrumentals in part of their work, but it's mostly the voices, and when you hear that voices, you realise that we're being taken back to another time. Some of it is pre-industrial revolution. Some of it is pre-Civil War. And it's all about community. It's all about gathering. It's all about gathering around, listening to stories. Which in a strange way brings us back to this. It is about gathering stories, making stories up, sitting by the fire. In the case of the Waterstones, it would have been having a pint, having a good sing-along, thoroughly enjoying themselves. All of them had day jobs, like painting and decorating buildings, but every night they was on the road, in a beaten up van, going to these different clubs, all up north. I don't think they really came down to London or to the south. So their whole sort of experience is in the northern towns, in the northern cities, mostly in the northern towns.
We'll try and find that.
Oh, you can get it on YouTube. It's a big
Try and
favourite.
put a link in the comments or something under the video if we can get that technical. I'll do my best.
Yeah, we're not moving away from the great god Pan. I think we got stuck. We don't want to give too much away.
I don't mind
because
too
the
much.
story itself
If you feel we need to give something away to
those
aid
three
the
stories.
conversation, I think we're right.
It fits into Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, and it fits into Picture of Dorian Gray. It fits into that uncertainty.
Yeah, so
And that's why, in certain books, he's actually called one of the first decadent writers to explore the decadent. Because sometimes you have to wonder, was he taking drugs? I don't think it matters. But there's certain sort of elements when you think, oh yeah, I know what that's about. But
well, that's good art. Will do that to you. Like if you read it, you'll know what it's about. It'll be totally different to what I know what it's about, and not the guy over there knows what it's about. Like if it's good art, you'll know exactly what it's about because it's spoken to you on a personal level, and that'll be different to someone else's. But in terms of the what was it? How would you describe it? Sort of this dark uncertainty. That's the word we're looking for. And the exploration of evil across these three books. I mean, to my mind, you got a couple of things going on there. So, like, the first one would be like, civilization at that point is, Britain is top nation, London's the capital of the world, everything's relatively secure. These main characters are relatively secure And if you're living probably in the most secure time, like well, even now, I suppose, we do something similar perhaps. But if you're living in a reasonably secure time, there's room for some titillation of what could go wrong, an exploration of horror from a kind of excitement of the audience kind of way, because they're not touched in the same way as the people who were worshipping the old gods were by the difficulties and horrors of just existence. And the other thing would be that I think, like you say, that Jackal, we'll talk about that next week, I'm sure, but like wants to explore evil. I think there's a reasonable case for that being a good idea generally, to explore evil, maybe in the imagination, because then you know what you are possibly capable of, because everyone is capable of evil, and two, what you're turning away from if you want to be, in inverted commas, good. Because if you have a concept of you could define good,
yeah, well, that's a good
but
point.
it's easier to run away from evil.
I mean, they, particularly the new bourgeoisie, as we can put it, the middle classes who were moving into the suburbs, respectability became a very, very big thing, wasn't it? There was mannerisms, there was, taking tea in the afternoon.
Oh yeah.
A totally weird new concept.
Yeah, just a way to,
and the way you behave, there were certain mannerisms
to ascribe what you're supposed to do, and then
and the professions were measured in, so.
It makes I like manners. They make navigating social situations
with all that
much
going
easier.
And then you had the decadence of the not all the aristocracy, but of the aristocracy. You certainly had a fear of madness, of losing control. Now, there's some brilliant work that's been done on that. Unfortunately, it's coming back into play. It's like that lovely book I've got about suicides, the one I showed you yesterday. And so there was all these tensions, but disruptive behaviour like madness, and you never spoke about depression. You never spoke how you felt.
Private life and public life, they're being much more.
And no matter what
stringent
people say, we
concepts.
still don't like talking about how we feel.
We're a lot better at it.
Yeah, it's all over the media. This is what me and Alan are exploring. But what is it? Suddenly we get a cold, and we might have A, B, C, D, E, or whatever. It's like people feel down for 2 days and they've got manic depression.
We're far too quick to ascribe a.
Now, could you imagine in that
a malady to a mood?
In that age, suffering from depression, you would never. Where do you go to talk about it?
Well, no, I mean,
Do you go
one
into?
would hope a
I mean,
doctor.
is there an exploration of?
We didn't know this stuff back then. No.
Suicide? Do you go into suicide? If you've got the money, do you go into opium? Now remember, opium was free. You could go into the chemist and you could buy opium. And it became such a problem because if your baby was crying too much, you go to the chemist and you put opium on a child's lips and they go to sleep. This is a fact. The medication of opium was a fact. But then there was the other side of opium.
Oh,
I know, it's terrifying.
And it makes you wonder what we're doing now that they're looking 100 years and go, these people were mental.
Then there's this other side of opium, the opium dens. Now, a lecturer friend of mine years ago, he wrote a book about this, and he tried to find where they were in the East End of London. You know, and again, what have we got? The East End of London. What does it conjure up? Everything that the middle class bourgeois did not want to sink into. But there was no opium dens. It was the imagination. There was opium clubs where you paid to get into,
Right.
to get completely smashed on opium, like that great invented character that a lot of people still think is real, Sherlock Holmes.
Yes.
He was injecting morphine.
7% cocaine solution
Yeah.
was his
So all those
drug of choice, but he did spend the opium thing comes from I can't remember which story it is, but he basically goes undercover for like a couple of months into an opium den to try to solve a crime.
But all these,
that's where that kind of trope comes from.
up until the First World War, all these drugs, all these weird medications were free. Well, not free. They weren't banned, but they were there. There was sort of, there was the sort of moral panics were going on. But as I say, with opium, which is the classic, you can get it anywhere.
Yeah, I mean,
That's,
you're talking about a society which was much less prescriptive, much more individual responsibility, live and let live, do as you do. And these things were a lot newer, so like people didn't know the consequences, and the scientific levels of research were so much further behind where they are now. We were only just starting to cure some diseases back then. So like really the problems of the difficulties and the nuances of what
there was still
what certain substances
suicide
might do to your brain was so low down on the priority list when you got cholera and all sorts of horrors for the doctors to
the
look
suicide thing was put down to a moral degradation of the individual or some other form of malady. One time, unfairly, London was actually accused of being the capital city of suicide throughout Europe. It wasn't actually, it was France.
Well, that's understandable.
But it was with the outbreak of the First World War that you had all the restrictions come in. And I think they began to come in.
Fill people full of it before sending them over the top.
No, that was different. That was something different. If you didn't go over the top, you got shot. But there was something that came in the Second World War with the German army. I forget the name of the drugs. But two things happened. One was the Crimean War. My God, we've gone off the subject again. One was the Crimean War, when it was discovered that the British soldiers were just completely and utterly unfit. You had, Florence Nightingale. She did also Mary Seacole did a lot of work, but it was the reporting back from the Times. That's why the Times has always kept that title, the Thunderer. The Times weren't reporting on the battles as so much the state of the British Army.
Right.
And the state of the French Army, but that's another point. But also, it was the Boer War that opened up again the state of the British Army, the physical state of the British Army. They sort of, when you see the shit that they was eating, you just wonder how they lived.
Right.
And so all these pinpricks of security were there. There was like bumblebees. Bumblebees upstairs, wasps stinging you and then running away. So that whole world wasn't as secure as we like to think it was.
Yeah.
There was always tensions going on. Diseases were coming up and diseases were going. I mean, and some of it, when people were working in those factories, you think, my God. And you read about the illnesses and how they were dying. Anyway, but it was known it was there, but we tended to forget about it. it's happened either up north or in the docks or somewhere.
Yeah.
Because the age of empire was meant to bring in all this wealth. But it brought in a whole lot of other...
Yeah, so it brought in the wealth,
yeah.
but and the growth that we now prosper from. But
And so to come across somebody like the great god Pan, it throws even more oil onto the fire. You know, not only are we insecure, and this is my off-the-top interpretation, but also these bloody gods from the past are now come and have a go at us. You know,
Yeah.
Can a gentleman be safe in the streets of?
well, it's the death stalking everyone kind of aspect that like as a sort of modern turn of the century society
Right, you've
where
got
we've
me
got all
going
this
now.
wonderful
I wrote
things.
an essay
He's still stalking them in a
years ago when I did my MA. I wrote an essay on the Victorian way of death,
Oh right.
how it became an industry, because there were certain ways of dying, and there were certain ways of organising a funeral. And now the funeral industry in the Victorian age in this country become a massive industry. You know, there was a way that you know, when the person was dead, your loved one or a member of the family, there were booklets of how you were meant to behave.
Well, this is the same thing, though, isn't it? It's the
And
manners
it's amazing, you
and
know.
an official
And it became,
mourning.
Yeah, it became a whopping great industry. So if you're a bit like me, you have your own sense of mourning, your own quietness. I don't know, there was no funeral. Still doesn't plant the tree. You know, it was quiet. That then would have been, my God, sir, what do you think you're doing? How dare you just, you know, why aren't you dressed in a certain way? You know, because basically the people, the funeral parlours just made a killing, like they do now. I mean, the funeral now, what is it, 6,000?
Yeah, probably. But I think that to be.
So what I'm saying is that it was, that whole era is not as it seems. It's interesting to go into it.
Yeah, it is. But I think there's something to be said for that in some ways, like this proscribed way of mourning probably made it easier for people in some ways because they had an outer, like, because what it does is it makes a distinction between public existence and private existence. So when you were out in public, among society, among other people, one, from the way that you were behaving, they immediately knew that you'd suffered a bereavement, so they could immediately moderate their behaviour in order to lessen any upset they might accidentally cause to you. So you're showing society, the other people, the situation that you're in. Then this distinction between public and private is something that we, I think, massively lost in more recent times. I think that this idea of a formality and how you behave in public gives you more space for your private life, for your private emotion, for your private thoughts.
But do you think that there is more space for private emotions now?
I think no. I think what we do is we display our private emotions more publicly, and I think that there's also harm
As I say,
in
this
that.
is something that me and Alan are exploring.
That's it.
Yeah, I think we got a different opinion.
Yeah, quite possibly.
But within all that, I
I'm
just want
just
to get back to
riffing
this.
on the subject.
If-
It's just,
yeah,
I think it's just
it's
interesting that
a good
actually
subject
it
to
might
look
give
at.
you some space in actual
It's a
fact.
good subject to look at.
And you don't have to think as well.
But-
If you go out, as long as you tick all the boxes, you don't actually have to put any energy on other people. in some ways, because
thank God that I
what
didn't
your
have to go
behaviour
through-
is.
Thank God I didn't have to go through that existence.
No, but yeah, of course, but I mean, I don't know.
Shall we end it there? Or what?
Let's go and deal with that.
It works.
Yes,
It works.
What?
we managed to open a portal into another universe and summon forth through
I
the
just
fire the
yeah.
great god Pan.
I
This
just
is the
wanna end-
klaxon
yeah.
that hails and foretells his coming.
How are we doing for time?
I don't know how long. I have no idea how long we've been going.
I just want to
actually.
end it on one point.
That's good. That's.
Yeah.
I think
Sorry,
the portal's been closed. I'm not sure if Pan
yeah,
made it through the
Yeah,
portal.
sorry about that, folks. It's been one of those afternoons.
But yes, the chimney might
It's
be a
to
little blocked.
lobotomy at the start of the story.
Yes. Yeah. There's a lot to that. You go.
No, I just want to bring it up. Remember, it was a scientific experiment.
And it was. If you cut out a little bit of this brain,
Yeah.
you'll see the great god Pan.
Yeah.
Were you recording when that happened?
Yeah. Don't worry. It was perfect. It's beautiful. Like yes, we were. Yes.
We went to the
Fire
portal.
alarms work.
Yeah. Well, we've got a fire. The fire alarms went off.
And there was the other, and don't forget, scientific experiments within a lot of the so-called decadent writers were always there. But the first one is, of course, Frankenstein. Written,
Hold that thought. Sorry, just really quickly on lobotomy.
yeah,
So you cut out a piece of the brain, and you see the great god Pan. Now we were reading Hitchens last Sunday, and just the fact that one needs to switch off one's critical faculties to have a full engagement with faith was something that he brought up. So it's almost a literal lobotomization to get you to a place where you can actually see a real engagement with religion in some ways. I don't know, it's a half thought. It's fascinating. Yeah, you have to chop a bit of the brain away to see God. Like that's almost an atheist point. I know it's a different God,
well, I'm an atheist. I wouldn't,
but do you see what I mean? That you have to chop out a bit of the brain in order to actually see God.
that is about spirituality and faith and belief. In many ways, I am an atheist, but I'm more akin to a pagan concept.
Yeah, me too. I kind of
of
use
religion.
my paganism
Yeah.
to explore my atheism. Because I mean, we've got to believe in something. I think that the new atheists, the Four Horsemen, like had a point to make 20 years ago, but their positions actually need to be nuanced in terms of the human interaction with story and the way that we look at the world and the importance of like the religions that mainly have stuck because of the power of their stories and how they relate to humans and how they exist in the world. And so I think what they kind of missed that point when they were going at it. But like on a simple level, like the cutting out of the brain to see God is interesting, being written 100 years
don't
ago.
forget,
But it could easily be an argument that Hitchens
in
or
the late
Dawkins
60s.
would find amusing in relation to their work. That's the point I was really making.
I don't know how extensive it was. I don't think it was all that extensive, but the idea of putting a drill in your brain quite popular. on acid.
All right.
To release, so that, the bottom is not a modern concept. It's always, the Egyptians used it. I think some of the Greek culture would have used it.
There must be some sort of
way up, way back.
There must be a meme of information that runs through that, like, if you actually prod a bit, then it does actually. If you prod in the right place, then it affects how you process the world around you, and so you're going to see things. I guess. You just nick that little bit there.
Yeah.
Just that bit.
There's even talk about the Incas using it as a concept. So, and of course with Frankenstein, once he had created the monster, he couldn't get rid of it. Unlike in the movie, the monster followed him all over the place, and it ends up in the Antarctic, or at the North Pole, with him and the monster. Now,
right, yes, we shall wrap up,
yeah,
shall we?
it's been a bit. It's been interesting, but I think
I think that book has given us a lot of stuff to kind of go over, and I think that.
But we got stuck with the book,
it,
didn't we? I didn't want to give too much away.
No, but I think
sense you didn't want to give too much away. So
but we used a bit, and hopefully people read it. I'll put we're reading it by this fireplace on the 25th of October. And hopefully it's not a long book, so hopefully you'll be here and we can have a discussion with the audience afterwards, which would be great.
That's on a Sunday, isn't it?
Yes, Sunday evening.
Make sure you book up, people. Come and get scared.
And next week, similar exploration of turn of the century Britain through the eyes of evil and good and dark forces with Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. So I've got more to read for next week. Or do you want to carry on with Pan?
Well, no, I think we'll do Pan. I'd like to pick up Pan after we've done our. No, we'll pick up after Machen.
Yeah.
After
the walk.
We've done our walk.
And shall I read Jekyll and Hyde for next week?
Have you got a copy?
No, I could get out my Kindle.
Yeah. Read parts of it. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. And we'll carry on at turn of the century London. Or we might change our minds on Tuesday or something. That's the plan. We might end up in Machen, or we might end up in Jekyll and Hyde. We'll keep it free. Cool. Oh man, Alfie, I've enjoyed this one.
It's been good.
So I think the Pan has come to us through the flames and aided us on our journey.
Well,